The Ontario government is attempting to make it easier to become a police officer. They're removing tuition fees and expanding the number of recruits in each class. But Premier Doug Ford is also scrapping a post-secondary education requirement for police recruits.
These measures will help attract new recruits, break down financial barriers that may have stopped people from becoming a police officer, and build a pipeline of police officers ready to serve and push back against the growing tide of crime.
Here to discuss today's changes is Michael Kempa, an associate professor of criminology at the University of Ottawa. Professor Kempa, good to see you again.
Thank you, you too. What
do you make of this plan by Doug Ford? His plan here to recruit more police officers.
Well, it's pretty much a random move. I mean, really, my first question would be to the Premier, why are you contradicting your own legislation? Because it was his Police Act in 2019 that got the whole ball rolling, requiring post-secondary education for police officers to begin with.
Okay, so explain that to me. Like, we have seen people recommend higher levels of education and a broader experience for police officers. This came up in the Mass Casualty Commission report in Nova Scotia. Why was it done, and why do you think he's getting rid of it?
So the whole idea is to change policing culture by bringing in that higher level of education and training. The idea, and again, this is not sort of a professor's recommendation, the province of Ontario is moving in the direction of community safety and well-being, where the police are one key pillar, working with mental health, working with schools, working with all manner of agencies that make that contribution to networks of community safety. To do all of that, they need to get out of the culture of looking inward for their own solutions, being the police driving the whole process of community safety. So that's where that idea for post-secondary education really came into play. The Mass Casualty Commission, in a sense, is endorsing where Doug Ford went in 2019 with that requirement, and now we've gone in a completely different direction. And it is odd because we're still waiting for that piece of legislation to be proclaimed. We're still waiting on the regulations.
Right.
So that's a 3.5-year process.
Right. So this is legislation the Ontario Government's Community Safety and Policing Act passed in March 2019 that put in the post-secondary requirements. Never fully implemented. Now they're taking it out. The Mass Casualty Commission wanted Public Safety Canada to work with provinces and territories to establish a 3-year degree-based model of police education for all public service police services in Canada. This is quite the departure from where things were headed.
Yes, I mean, I'm all in favor. It's a great idea to eliminate the tuition cost for people attending the Ontario Police College once they're hired. That's a great idea. But then we shouldn't eliminate the requirement for the post-secondary education. I understand the logic that if you make it basically easier to join the police, you're removing barriers. But rather than lower the bar, why not make the education more accessible? Perhaps create scholarships, particularly for hard-to-reach communities, to go through that training to join police services a little bit more prepared.
Right, because they're trying to open it up, increase the numbers, because they do have a capacity challenge in a lot of the police forces. But I wonder, what are the consequences of making it high school only, and then you go into a 3-month course, essentially, is what it is. What are the potential consequences of moving in that direction for policing?
Well, the idea of the post-secondary was that, and the Mass Casualty Commission made this point, it needs to be research-oriented education.
Right.
So in a sense, if you want to train police officers to be good problem solvers, to work in those networks of community safety, you teach them about how to evaluate statistics, to evaluate the quality of information on the internet and so forth. It basically makes them good investigators. So that's the logic. You don't get that in a 12-week program where you're running modules around the necessary specific skills for law enforcement.
So does this weaken policing? Because we've heard, I understand the response to the crime wave that the country has experienced, violent crime being up in the country, a string of police killings. You understand the need for greater safety. They want more police to deal with some of these challenges. But there have also been endless stories about culture issues and culture challenges inside police forces, and that is some of what higher levels of education have been aimed at solving too. So what advice would you have for them on how to tackle that if they're going to go in this direction?
Well, the big thing would be, just because we're eliminating the minimal requirement, it's not necessary that every single municipality is going to immediately rush off to hire high school graduates as police officers. The province has acted before in policing where municipalities have said we're not going in that direction, and police services have moved in their own standards. So there's nothing to stop municipalities and police services boards from carrying on hiring the most qualified candidates. It's just simply that they don't have to hire people who have post-secondary education.
Do you think this will achieve the recruitment goals that the Premier has spelled out? I think it's 3 cohorts of 480. They graduate a year now. He wants to get it up to 4 cohorts of 550. So quick math, that's about an extra 700, 750 police officers every year that they would pump out under the system. Do you think that there is that level of interest and that level of demand for police positions to do that?
Well, just because you create the candidates doesn't necessarily mean that cities and police boards have the money to hire that number of police officers. It's a bit like where the province says, well, we're going to have community safety and well-being plans in every municipality, which requires all manners of investment into housing, into education, and so forth. But if there's no provincial money behind those plans, cities can't necessarily implement them. So it's very similar. We'll create the officer supply, but will cities be able to do the hiring?
So is this a solution in search of a problem, or does this actually fix something, do you think?
It's a bit of a random move, as I say, a solution in search of a problem, but it doesn't make sense in that it just doesn't line up with where the province itself was going in 2019. I'm a bit concerned what this means for where the legislation is going to end up. Are other of the regulations going to further water down what we were bringing into being in 2019 by the time this thing is finally proclaimed reputedly sometime later this year or in early 2024?
Okay, Michael Kempa, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.